Hey everyone, this is part 2 of this episode. If you want to hear the beginning of this conversation, head over to part 1 and listen to that first. If you're here for part 2, well, enjoy!
So out of curiosity, and this is just completely theoretical, I ask purely out of interest, do dogs get access to socialized healthcare in Latvia?
No.
Oh.
Sadly.
So if like Wallace gets cancer again, I can't just fly to Latvia and go, hey, he's Latvian, your parliament said so.
No. Do you know what gets that? Like farm animals.
Farm animals get socialized healthcare in Latvia?
In an extent, yes. We because unlike in the United States or other places, we have very few mega huge industrial farms. A lot of the farming is done by smaller farmers. We like that idea. We like to support our own local farm. They're on subsidies, of course, because they wouldn't be able to compete with China and everything. But that's the one thing that the Latvian taxpayer is A-okay with. We like our local farmers. And there is, like, if you ask your average Latvian person whether or not he's ready to spend more in taxes, but to have this, like, Latvian produce in the stores, the answer would be yes, definitely. We are kind of like that, so it might sound weird to you, but it's just that, again, the benefits of having a very small country.
I think that's a big part of it is, like, I want to say Latvia is 3 million people. Am I correct? In
2 million
2 million people?
Yes. The idea is that we kind of feel closer to each other, I suppose.
My suspicion is that you also probably have a much more narrow bandwidth of political opinion in terms of ideological consensus around what the government ought to be doing.
For the most part, we're center slightly to the right, but like slightly to the right in the fiscal issues and slightly to the left in social issues. It's a mess, but again, over here, it's like we're way more cohesive because to explain this to American listeners, we are united not just because we have a constitution. Constitution is a thing that we can amend. It doesn't matter to us. It's the fact that, again, it's very useful to think about our country in the sense that we're a tribal people who have survived until today. It's kind of like, imagine if Iroquois would just survive and preserve their culture through today, through literally, there had been a crusade against us, and then we were like serfs and everything. So there's a huge tie to the land. We just kind of have this more feeling of togetherness, I suppose. We're quite more homogeneous in that way.
I think that's true. I would add to that, although I agree with that there's also just a scaling issue that you do not suffer from that we do suffer from. You've got 2 million people. And so I don't remember the exact constituency size, but I want to say that the members of parliament have constituencies of like 18,000 people, something like that.
Approximately, yeah.
Yeah. So if you are in Latvia, your ability to not just keep your eye on the government, but literally meet with and talk to your member of parliament is very, very high.
Yeah, I literally do that. And also the fact that due to how our political system works, for example, a thing that you will love about Latvian political system, it is literally illegal in Latvia to run any ads, anything related to election in the last month before election happens.
What happens if I make a documentary about...
No, that's fine. Just political parties can only start advertising. I hope I get this right. Political parties can only start advertisements 1 month before the election happens. You don't have all these massive campaigns that happen like throughout the year or something. They're just not a thing. They have to be very specific because we hate ads. We despise ads.
That does sound nice. Yeah, I think that you're dealing with very different circumstances like that. It sounds to me like your ability to both see what the government is doing and to interact with your leaders and hold them accountable is much higher. So like in the United States, I am disinclined to give more power and money to the United States Congress until it gets to the point where I actually think the money might be helping stuff. So like I give money to charity. It's not that I'm selfish. I want to help people. I don't see much evidence. It seems to me that if you're making a pie chart of tax dollars, a quarter of it is going to just random stuff that is things that I would probably disagree with. A quarter of it is being pissed away through just good old-fashioned incompetency. A quarter of it's graft in the form of subsidies. And then about a quarter of it might get to the thing we actually want to do. So it's
Because of that, because again, because of your history and culture. Like I said when I was in Texas, the best thing about Americans is that you care about money a lot. The worst thing about Americans is that you care about money a lot. It's a thing, and it's absolutely true. And the situation is that you're also among the most charitable people on planet Earth. You are, like, Americans constantly actually donate to charities way more than anyone else.
Yes. That is demonstrable. The data is very good on that the United States, both in parochial and non-parochial terms, parochial tends to mean giving directly to your religion. So, but even in non-parochial terms, where we're not just talking about the religiosity of the United States, but giving to secular things like cancer treatment, things like that, there's a much more robust charitable mindset and framework in the United States compared to many other countries.
And that is one of the best things that I've noticed about your whole government and country.
Thank you.
It seems a bit. That's one thing that I've been noticing lately. There's a lot of people, again, especially in Europe, oftentimes have stereotypes of your country. One of them, by the way, being is that I still don't exactly understand how you have managed to get exactly 0 medals in any shooting event in the Olympics.
Did we not win any of those? You'd think that we would have cleaned up at all of that.
Right, I know, right? But no, you didn't.
The one thing that I think I've mentioned on your show before, but that I would want to communicate to Europeans is that I think Europeans oftentimes understandably want to conflate their specific country with the United States, and that's not the right analogy. The right analogy is the European Union with the United States. We are 340 million people. We are similar in size to the European Union. I would argue that there's more political latitude within the United States than there is within any member state within the European Union. There tends to be much more consensus politically and ideologically in individual European Union states than there is in the United States. So we are more politically diverse. We are as large as the European Union, and I find generally that Europeans are much more in favor of a robust, cradle-to-grave European welfare state. And then when I ask them, would you want this to be done out of Brussels, where the European Union handles this instead of your country, they're like, no, that would be way too big. No, we want to have Latvian healthcare, but we don't want to have European healthcare.
I, by the way, disagree on this matter because I have spoken to my politicians, and despite the fact that European bureaucracy is huge and horrible, it also doesn't, like, in Latvia, the other side of the coin, the fact that we're so small, is the fact that if someone really dumb comes up and decides to do something stupid, they also can do it very quickly.
Right. You are more efficient in your government. Yeah,
but we're also efficient in doing stupid stuff.
Right.
European bureaucracy, as huge and bloated as it may be, is quite good at preventing really, really, really dumb things from happening, which is what I like. And I, for one, and as I'm sorry, my American listeners...
Well, you have much more faith in your large government than I do. I do not think the United States Congress is a bulwark against stupidity.
Look, that's the whole issue, because if people like Trump and other people want Europe to pull more of their own weight, we have to become a bit more larger in our economies and a bit stronger. And I, for one, think that a strong European Union, which would have more rights, I'm sorry, but that would be more competitive against you guys.
Go for it.
If we're looking at the situation where, we stop being as friendly as we are now for whatever reason, then I'd rather have my side also be able to pull its own weight and do its own thing. And for that, we need to be a bit more active in everything. So
what would you want to consolidate in terms of the European Union? So presently you have free movement of people, which is a great deal. You're a wonderful.
I know, but I'm all for more like a federal situation there. European United States, basically, with strong states' rights, but I would not oppose Brussels doing things.
Presently, as I understand it, what generally happens with the European Union is the EU will set target rates for a given thing, and the member states will come up with how they're going to do it. So the EU will say, for example, everybody has to have universal health care, but we don't really care how you're going to do it. Mm-hmm. So Latvia has your model where there's a base level of pay, but everybody has out-of-pocket expenses.
Yeah, that's at least the one thing, because that's how it works in other countries. And there I'm going to, again, criticize Latvia for a bit, because our politicians, they're still of the generation who grew up in the Soviet Union, and they don't like to think and function very well. So what they will do is whether as, say, people in Belgium or in France or in Germany, they would see the EU and they would see the whole thing that Brussels recommends them to do. And then they would be like, sacre bleu, no, we're not going to do this. This is against our culture, all that stuff, right? In Latvia, our government is like, they send their things in form of recommendations which governments should do. And often in case our government is just a bit too lazy and then just adopt them wholeheartedly without even thinking about our everything. So that also causes stuff.
So help me in terms of what you would want the European Union to accumulate power in. What presently do you see a deficit in European member states that they cannot do that would need to be handled at the supranational level?
For one, EU needs its own united military force. I mean, this much has been proven. This much has been proven time and time again. I mean, we have been. I grew up in the period with us.
You have battle groups right now, but they're still very much intergovernmental treaty type things. There's no actual European superstar.
Do I trust them? Because again, my views are probably skewed, and most people in Latvia, there's way too much national pride there. But I think that at least, if we're not going to do this in the EU level, then I think that for the future of at least the Baltic countries, then we all should at least be able to unite in a single kind of block there. Because where countries just in a lot of cases, European smaller countries, we lack the population and we lack the kind of the whole combined effort, because we can't send a man to space. We just don't have enough people to provide enough tax money to have like a NASA level situation there. We can't do extra big projects alone anyways. And sure, there are treaties and everything, but that's just so much extra paperwork. I think that a more federated union of European countries would create a situation where, we're actually able to maybe have some bigger projects than we have currently.
Okay, so like the military, that one makes sense to me.
Military, space exploration, like we already work together in a lot of stuff, but it's a lot of paperwork.
There is a European Space Agency, so that already exists.
Yes, and they're doing well. They're doing well, but it's all sort of weird because in the current system, at least, and a lot of people here feel that way, which is whether you're a skeptic, is that a lot of politicians, especially those who are from more Western countries who are not in our position, we kind of feel like sometimes left alone, sometimes, that we're not listened to, even then when we're saying something good. The Euro Parliament doesn't work like United States Senate, it works like United States Congress. You only get representatives based on your population, which means that obviously there are those factions in there because, all the parties from all the European countries who agree on something, they're kind of center left, center right, whatever, unite in those blocks. That's how the situation is dealt with. But in a lot of those cases, it's just that, again, we oftentimes feel like we're the odd kid out, so to speak.
Latvia there, yeah.
Latvia and like other smaller nations of the EU. We don't feel exactly very representative.
The bit that I would be concerned with, that I would want you guys to hold back on, it makes sense for me that you want to scale up from ideally you want government activity to be invested where the issue is happening, because that's going to be more responsive and more aware of the local people. You want to scale up when that unit's unable to do it. So pollution's a very good example of this, pollution doesn't obey borders. So if there's smog coming in from Lithuania into Latvia, that's a situation where it makes sense to me that there would be some sort of European level agency that would handle that, or law handling that. That one makes sense to me.
This, by the way, is one of the arguments that was very much mispresented by people who voted for Brexit, for UK leaving the EU. Because they always spoke about how EU regulates those infamous bananas, how bananas have to be a certain angle or something. The problem is that that's the easy measurement to make, because bananas, believe it or not, contain a slight amount of radiation in them. Turns out that they are the angles, the weirdness of how a banana looks like is a very easy way how to measure the amount of radiation it has. And as we all come from a varied continent, we kind of don't want, say, Spanish people, like Latvian people going to Spain and buying bananas that will cause them cancer, because the difference in the whole natural radiation thing. But the fact is that they decided that, hey, yeah, like radiation measurements, Geiger counter is expensive, people understand them. The whole like banana thingy is very just a simple way how to measure exactly that thing. And that was misrepresented.
Well, that seems like a fairly straightforward one. I would caution, though, that giving massive regulatory powers to a distant body with whom you have very low input, and Latvia would have very low input in any type of pan-European regulatory framework, just given the population size of Latvia, that you do invite a lot of concerns of regulatory capture occurring and just inefficiencies occurring.
That is true. However, here I have to say one important thing, like as a journalist I've noticed, in a lot of these local councils that we have here, like, people like cities where, with city mayors, everything, it's not that the capital is where the most corruption happens in Latvia. It's the smaller towns where, like, no one looks after them. And at one point, that was a big deal here in Latvia. They decided to basically allow the governmental run newspapers. The newspapers run by the public funds to run ads in them, which allowed these people, because, if you run a governmental office, right, you don't want kind of the local newspaper who's actively trying to do some good work to be able to function, because it's way better to basically run the whole thing yourself and just state that if you just undercut the cost of ads in your newspaper, that means the local newspaper who actually criticizes the government doesn't get ad money. The local city municipality, they use state payers' money to basically run ads for free to undercut advertisements going to the independent newspapers who criticize the government. So they go out of business and there's no one criticizing the government.
It sounds to me like you should get rid of those publicly funded newspapers and just have the independent ones.
Well, the public newspaper was supposed to just inform people about, hey, we fixed the road, and that's where the whole kind of, we're making this celebration there. It's supposed to be just an informative thing about the events, and maybe, that's where you post that, hey, we want to build this new thing, there's going to be a debate in town hall, this stuff. But they allowed to run ads in them, which basically destroyed a bunch of these local newspapers here. My very newspaper, which I worked in, which I started my career in, Ludza Zeme, the land of Ludza, mind you, it's gone out of business right now, and I feel extremely sad about that. Wife didn't tell me about it until voting.
I think you bring up a good point about localism, which is the counter argument to what I'm saying, which you've alluded to, which is a strong one, is that when you have activity going at the national level, it does get more scrutiny because you have think tanks, watchdog organizations that have the resources and the mental bandwidth necessary to look at it. So if you're looking at banana regulations at a national level, or let's say in the United States, if you're looking at banana regulations nationally, you're going to have watchdogs and think tanks that are able to keep a spotlight on that in a way that they're not going to be able to do on a county by county level. I think that there is something to that. But I would... again, I'd caution, like, if, let's say you just got rid of Latvian healthcare and you had European healthcare, I don't know that it would be run better than Latvian healthcare. It might be. It's possible that the eggheads in Brussels would do a better job than the Latvian people, but it's also possible that something even dumber would happen at the European level and you wouldn't be able to opt out of it. One of the great benefits to the European Union at this time that the United States does not have is that there's so much intergovernmental variation that competes with itself, where if you're in Denmark and you just don't like the way the Danish governmental system and political economies run, you can go to another member state of the European Union and it will be actually different. Whereas in America, we've kind of got this marble cake model now where the federal government is involved in everything and there's lots of grants that have strings attached. There's not as much variation. Like with healthcare, it doesn't vary tremendously from state to state. There's more variation in the European Union in terms of healthcare, which I think is very healthy.
That's the thing about, thankfully, we moved to this to some actual discussion here. It's going to be nice. At least,
and the coffee kicked in. It kicked in about 40 minutes ago. You can kind of tell the moment when my brain clicked on.
The big thing is that, again, look at Russia, as you mentioned before. A lot of, currently, I think they recently, by the way, moved away from these appointed governors, but right now the governors run elections where, for example, in Dagestan, 99.9% people vote in a certain way.
Wow.
Yeah. They bought electronic voting machines from Estonia because they do it completely digitally. And then they use them to just scam the election results completely.
Yeah, okay.
What a great result for all this mess, right? That's the whole problem, that they, right now, if you're appointed a governor in Russia, it's kind of treated as if basically a permission to be corrupt and steal stuff, and steal funds and everything, which I find just, a bit awful, so to speak. Kind of not a personal fan of this situation.
Yes, I should throw out here that I tend to have a pyramidical structure of where government activity is invested. As I said, I think it's best allocated where the problem is, and you only scale up when that local polity is unable to deal with the problem. There are situations like having a county-by-county military is not going to work. You have certain things that you want to be at a national level. That being said, corruption and graft are bad at any level. And again, that is a pretty good counter. I think the counter argument to my position, at least in the United States, is I think that people's attention automatically goes to whatever the top is.
Oh, yeah.
If Texas were its own country, you would suddenly find that people would know the
What do you mean? Yeah. What do you mean, comrade? Texas ain't country?
If it were its own fully independent country, I think you would find that people would know a lot more about their state legislature than they do now. Whereas right now, people are paying attention to Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC and Ted Cruz and people at the national level.
Wait, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I sadly know who she is. I have no love for her. I'll be flank. That if I remember correctly, she was the one who was extremely pro Putin to the level which I kind of don't even understand.
It could well be. For my own mental health, I do not pay attention to Marjorie Taylor Greene very much, so I cannot speak to any of her positions, but I do not think I would be hanging out with her if I were a member of Congress. But I think whatever level of government is at the top just kind of sucks up all the attention in the room. And so one of the things that you guys have presently in your current configuration in the European Union, which is very beneficial, is you get to have the benefits of a massive free trade network between member states and freedom of movement between all members of the European Union, both of which are colossal benefits to the EU and incredibly impressive feats in and of themselves. But it's coupled where the attention still rests at the national level. So my guess is that more people in Latvia know who their member of parliament is than their representative in the European Union's parliament at this time.
Oh yeah, for sure.
My guess is that more people in Latvia know who the president of Latvia is than the president of the European Council. And so the democratic activity and attention is still vested at that intermediate, the equivalent of the state level in the United States. And that in the United States, that's not really the case. Most people are paying attention to the national level rather than paying attention to the local or state level, which is where they can really make a difference in terms of democratic activity.
That's kind of true because EU elections in general have way less attendance rates. And this is my plan, dear listeners. I intend to do this because of how, if you count the amount of votes, how much you need to vote to get elected in EU Parliament, and if you understand that there's a huge diaspora outside of Latvia of Latvian citizens, including honorary ones like Wallace, Latvian citizens who have dual citizenship, because we have these things with a bunch of countries, including yours, they can vote in EU elections, EU Parliament elections.
I assume Wallace can't vote, although that would be amazing.
Well, he can't, but the idea is that I want to go into politics later in my life, and I decided that a fun idea would be that if the elections come and EU citizens also can just travel abroad and vote in other countries, there's a bit more process involved. But basically, I think I'm going to use my show as a platform at one point.
Mm-hmm. Wait, so you would be a platform for Latvians abroad? You'd be kind of a mouthpiece for them?
I guess so, and Latvians in general, because like in EU Parliament elections, I bet I could get other EU citizens not from Latvia to just come over to Latvia on election day, and we would have a massive party, and at the end it would be like, okay, yeah, that's all cool, guys. Now please go and vote for me.
Wait, what's the residency? How long do you have to be in Latvia before you can vote? Can you just show up?
You have to be an EU citizen, and there are rules. Obviously, it's not as simple as everything. But
if I'm German and I'm on vacation in Riga on the day of the election, I assume I don't get to vote as a constituent, right? Like I have to be a resident there.
At least you could previously. I have to go and read through this. There are things. But
what? Wait, so you could just get like two trucks of German frat boys and like get them to vote for you?
That would be really cool. That would be really, really cool. Yes, I would like.
I mean, like in that case, like I'll join the Latvian parliament. I'm pretty sure I could like get enough people together to get me
Probably
in.
More than I could. Yes.
Maybe. I suspect you have more European listeners than I do, my friend. I have European listeners, but I bet you have more.
Well, you have me, which is nice, I suppose. I hope at least that this is nice. If it is not nice, then I'm so sorry.
Listen, I am a big fan of Latvia. I really enjoyed visiting it. I don't know if you know this, but my dog is actually Latvian, and so I have a lot of personal connections with Latvia. I would love for you to become president of Latvia. That'd be great. I'm rooting for you. If you could, like, if you ever get a shot at running for president, let me know. I'll come over and campaign for you. That sounds terrific.
No, I really would like to, actually, because it's not about the president. We call it the prime minister. Our president does the things that your VP does, basically.
Okay, so you've got that. A lot of the European systems. There's the head of state, the head of government are different. The president's largely ceremonial, meets with diplomats, shakes hands, but the actual governmental powers invested in the prime minister.
Yeah, that's the thing.
All right, well, I got to tell you, it sounds like a lot more fun to be president based on what you're telling me here. But if you want to get shit done, I guess go for prime minister.
Hi everyone, Annette here. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Eastern Border. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you who are supporting us on Patreon or via our website. Your financial support is really what keeps this show going, so thank you from the bottom of our heart. If you're not a Patreon and would like to become one, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/theeasternborder, or support us via our website, www.theeasternborder.lv. That said, hope you're enjoying this episode and talk to you later. Bye!
but the whole idea about all these things is one thing, by the way, which stunned me, which I really want to bring up here in a more serious note, is that a lot of people don't understand the sheer scale of countries, at least here, because we're a small country. We're a size I have learned this, what about the size of West Virginia, like geographically?
And about 80% of your population lives in Riga, right? Like the majority
About half of our population lives in Riga, yes. So Riga is by American standards, we have about 1 million people, because technically Riga has 650,000, but you also have to include everyone who just commutes to work daily to Riga, which is in the surrounding areas. And that would definitely be 1 million. And the situation is that a lot of people don't understand the whole scale issue, as you said previously. They haven't seen, I suppose, how the whole United States situation works. The sheer scale of everything happening is just scary to us. And a lot of people here sometimes tend to think that it's a similar thing in the United States, where you can just come in there.
When you become Prime Minister of Latvia, if you're able to put in a good word for me, I'd be happy to come over and become Ambassador of the United States, or wherever. Like maybe I'll represent Lithuania.
It's about the whole law thing, because people don't understand here, at least in Latvia, how huge the states are.
Yes. So I'll give an example of this and why I think scaling is so important, and why I don't think that maybe Germany, which is a large federation, would be a comparable corollary to the United States. But
I was surprised about how many American people have not traveled outside of their country.
yeah, that being said, though, when you look at the rates here, again, I maintain the European Union and the United States are the corollaries to compare, not the individual member states. When you do that, here's the data. The amount of Europeans who have never left their country is the same amount as Americans who have never left their state. When you look at the amount of Europeans that have traveled throughout Europe, it's the same as Americans that have traveled throughout the United States. And when you look at the amount of Europeans that have never left Europe itself, it's about the same as Americans who've never left America.
My only trips outside of Europe have been to the United States so far. So unless you count a very, very, very tiny small visit that I don't count in Japan when I was like a kid, because my Japanese language and culture is cool. Very, 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 very situation.
Presumption that Americans are navel gazing, like that is to some extent true. We do not care about foreign policy and foreign affairs nearly as much as other countries do. That's true. But presumed lack of travel is an artifact of economics. It's not anything else. Because when you look at it, again, the amount of Americans who've never left America is pretty much the same as the amount of Europeans who've never left Europe. It's just that they're all different countries, whereas we are different states. But I do want to point out, like, another scaling example of this. Like, if you talk to any engineers, they will tell you that if you want to have a 2-story building and a 15-story building, the physics are such that you don't just increase the size of it 15 stories and it's exactly the same. Like, there are scaling issues, or like large people more likely to retain heat than smaller people because the surface area to volume is a different ratio. And so I think scaling is really, really important with government, and I think it's really, really understudied. In terms of just the breadth of the United States, something that I'd point out here is like minimum wage. The wealthiest county in the United States, Marin County, and the poorest county in the United States, I think Lafayette County in Mississippi, but it's definitely Northern California and Mississippi. The economic variance between these two counties is greater than that of the United Kingdom and Brazil. There's more economic disparity in the United States than the nations of Brazil and the United Kingdom compared to one another. I think most people would agree it would be nuts if the United Kingdom and Brazil agreed to have the same minimum wage. Like, you'd go, well, no, you're completely different economies. There's local variance. That there's going to be so many unintended consequences to that. In the same way that I think most people in the European Union would probably say that the minimum wage in Latvia probably shouldn't be the same minimum wage as Paris, that there's enough variance there. Well, all of that applies to the United States. There's so many different things where it's not a country of 3 million people is just a completely different scaling operation than a country of 340 million people. And again, I say that the best corollary is the European Union itself, not any individual member state.
Well, that is true, but just in a lot of cases, people just, again, don't understand this fact very well. Politics are complex, and people just don't like to think about this whole matter. In a lot of cases, people in Europe are also stunned about the fact that a lot of Americans don't actually have passports, because over here that would be illegal, because we all have them, and that's the same thing why Europeans actually know more languages, because we all speak different languages. So it's
if there were 50 different languages in the United States, you would find that most Americans would speak 3 different languages. But as it is, we speak, we have English and Spanish and a couple of others, but the structural element's different. One of the things that I think surprises Americans is we tend to have this like really, really, really high opinion of Scandinavia as like sort of Google plus Star Trek of like that's what we should be shooting for. And by the way, I think Scandinavia is great. I'm not knocking Scandinavia, but like one of the things that I have to point out to my friends in America is like Sweden's what, like 6 million people. The population of Sweden is like 80% in 3 cities. I'm shooting from the hip here, but it's like we're talking about like
You're close. Sweden's about, I think, 10 million, closer to that. Norway's about 5 million.
Yeah, so we're talking about like not even New England. We're talking about a country that is much more homogenous. We're also talking about very different economic situations. On my show, The Political Orphanage, I don't tend to rail against the welfare state nor against redistribution of resources. That's not actually something that bothers me very much. I'm in favor of a welfare state. I'm in favor of there being...
That warms my heart, comrade.
Yeah, I'm in favor of there being a social safety net. I want it to be efficacious, but I want there to be a social safety net. The thing that I tend to inveigh against is the regulatory state. You get to have a private company, but we are going to meticulously tell you how to use it. That is a situation where America is far more regulated than Scandinavia. What we tend to do in the United States is we have a big government in the sense that we order the private sector around, but we don't have a developed social safety net. Over in Scandinavia, they have higher taxes on the middle class. That's the principal difference. The tax rate's actually less progressive. It's higher on the middle class. That might be a good deal, but they're much lower on regulation. There's less zoning. There's less regulations in terms of private companies.
Sometimes it gets taken a bit too far. Case in point, UK, they have a privatized water system, which just does not work because that is... Look, water and those utilities, you can't really have a competition in them because you're going to build competing pipes?
Could be. I can't speak to that. I don't know anything about the water, the UK's water.
The problem is that the companies know that they can be bailed out by public money very easily, so they just don't provide services, and then they kind of make bad decisions, pay high dividends, and then they're like, well, look, government, bail us out, because if you don't, no water for London. Thames Water is very well kind of infamous for this whole mess because they have leaky pipes and the quality of the services is horrible, and they're technically private, but there's no competition of them. Like, there is no competition involved due to the simple fact that it's very, very, very expensive to run competing pipelines and it's just not practical in any way or form.
Markets are really, really good. I'm very pro-market, but for markets to do their magic, they need to be competitive. They need to be open. That is to say that new competitors can enter the market, and they need to be transparent so that people can actually make decisions based on rational choice. You need those 3 ingredients.
This is my whole issue with there are certain areas where, like, free market is, as we spoke at the beginning, and we circle back to all of our subjects. Free market works best in cases where, because it runs on profit, and there are some things which just should function even when they're not exactly profitable, and that's where kind of the state comes in, which is what I feel good about.
Sure. I don't disagree on that.
If we wouldn't have like subsidized airlines, those flag carriers, we kind of need them so that they wouldn't go up the price.
Seems to me to be something you could have. Where I would agree with you is,
okay, maybe that was a bad example, possibly, but
things that don't have a profit margin might be, or don't have a profit incentive, might be something where the government needs to come in and subsidize it. So, for example, like medicine for people that are really psychologically ill, that could be a situation where, like, look, these aren't rational people.
That by the way is what we have in Latvia. That thing is free,
Great.
And I know because my mother ran into severe mental health issues. She has bipolar disorder. And I'm helping her out all the time because she can't. Like, she used to be a lawyer, but then my stepdad died, and that just crushed her. And also, again, why I hate payday loans as a horrible, horrible thing. She had some quote unquote friends that very much abused her status, and they didn't check her mental issues, so they took those payday loans under her name. And I've had to repay about. At this point, I've repaid about 3,000 euros in total in those debts, and I'm not done yet. It's in total about 5,000 euros, because those people obviously they were like, no, we already maxed out on all those loans. How about, we'll totally help you out. And they really abused my mom and everything. And And that, I think in this case, yeah, and I'm really, really happy that I help my mom as much as I can, because obviously she can't work.
Well, I'm very, very glad to hear that.
But she's getting much, much better now. And that's a thing, that these mental health issues, those things are just, when I've seen and experienced personally how this predatory lending works. My mom wouldn't be given a loan in any other situation whatsoever, because,
There would be no black market available to her. There wouldn't be any loan sharks in the neighborhood. That would never happen.
See, my mom would not go to the loan sharks, because even loan sharks wouldn't give her money because of her mental health issues. And at that point, she had lost her job and everything, so I'm just supporting her. And that you can give just these loans to someone with I was in Lodz at the time. I wasn't there to help her out, and just scammers got to her and then just took this and yeah, sure, it's on the scammers, but it's also on the company itself for the very fact that weirdly enough, if I don't help my mom deal with this stuff, then the loans are going to go to me, because it's written in the contract that if my mom passes away, then I have to pay them, which is just weird, because it's documented that and we've sued, but technically speaking, they have the rights to do this, and this is why this whole mess got more regulated, and that's just a big personal issue, which is why I really, really recommend people to be financially conscious, don't live over your means, and be just very, very thoughtful about whether or not when you take your loans and when you do stuff, because you can get into a lot of issues that you did not expect or something.
I very much agree with that. And to back up a little bit, like something that I would fund much higher in the United States, I'll do an episode on this hopefully soon. Something that I very much wish to increase funding on is mental health. We deinstitutionalized a lot of people in the 80s. There were a lot of people that were in insane asylums that were released, and you see a dramatic, almost, as I understand it, one-to-one correlation with prison increase at that time. So it would appear that we just basically kicked people out of mental health facilities and they ended up going into the prison system, which is less humane and probably more expensive, or at least equally expensive. So those are things that I would increase. But what I would add on the profit margin side, like what we should say is what profit margins are really, 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 really good at doing is expanding supply. When I am directly incentivized to provide goods and services by making a buck on it, you get a lot more of those goods and services. So things like housing, food, stuff like that, those are situations where the more the better. That's something that's very good to keep in terms of the private sector.
Yeah, that is true about the private sector. However, and I'll speak for the people of Ireland here, because they're facing a massive, massive, massive housing crisis, biggest in Europe. The big issue is that if the companies who, for example, in real estate sector, if they get too big, then as much as housing is built, it's really hard to compete if you're a person that needs to go through mortgage and do all the due diligence and everything. It's really hard to compete with just a big company who just buys up the whole property sector with cash straight up, and then they just charge insane rent prices for it. People just, these days, we've gotten to the point where very few people can afford their own housing in Europe, because we have much larger population density than you guys have. For example, yes, everyone knows in the States that Texas is the size of France, right? However, the population of France is 70 million, and Texas is about,
Sure.
20 million? You have more land to go around. You have cheaper stuff.
Okay, well, so what would you do to,
I don't know, because also it is kind of silly in this case, because I'm not an economist. I don't have a solution for this. I just see the whole weirdness, and not like governments do things right. No. Governments are oftentimes they make very weird mistakes, and I've brought this up about our own one. But this is why I stand for what we're doing. The best that I can do. I don't have answers, but at least I can hope that we're talking about this issue on my show, which smarter people than I listen to. And then maybe we can bring attention to these issues, and maybe someone else can figure out the solution.
Sure, and I should say I'm very unfamiliar with housing policy in the European Union and the individual member states, and could well be there's some novel policy that I'm unaware of that works very well. In which case, I'd like to know.
Yeah, but that's the big whole problem here, is that, in my personal view, because I was born in the Soviet Union after all. In my opinion, capitalism works best when it's all about smaller and medium businesses. When you have a bunch of these competing small medium businesses, then it's fine. But when it's gotten to the point of mega corporations who basically monopolize their own sector, then we run into issues. Then we run into a bunch of problems. So I would say less regulation, more monopoly breaking to have real competition. because that's where capital runs into problems. And for my Latvian and Eastern European listeners, what a lot of people over here don't understand about capitalism is that, like in the 90s, a lot of people were so poor they were not affected by the kind of stock exchange crashes and everything else, because investing is still very foreign to them. But one thing that is just strange for a lot of these people is that they don't understand that why, because I've been asked this a lot by people from my region, why does capitalism focus so much on growth instead of, actual physical large numbers? And then I have to explain to them that the flaw with capitalism is that it needs to grow constantly, because under the stock market shift, and I'll just do this real quick for my Eastern European listeners, in capitalism, you can basically vaporize wealth. This is why stock exchange crashes happen. It's not that it's not like a Ponzi scheme where, like Mavrodi, who runs away with money. Like in capitalism, there are situations where in the end no one has money, because the guy who bought up every last property before the stock exchange crash and value crash, he has the dollars, but the dollars can inflate and lose their value. So in one day you have $1 million in what they can buy, and the next day you can have, the value can just go down. And when value of the currency goes down, then everyone loses, because the real value can just evaporate.
I agree with your assessment that it would be better to have less regulation and more monopoly busting. I agree with that. As I said earlier, for markets to function and to function well, they need to be open, transparent, and competitive. So if you have somebody monopolizing it, any monopoly, and this is one of the reasons I'm very critical of government, because a lot of the time the government is a monopoly. And we go, well, you get this kind of minor input where you get to be one of 70 million people voting for 2 senators out of 100. I do not think that the democratic process is sufficient to negate the downsides of monopolies that happen. That being said, I'm very opposed to monopolies. So I'm in favor of antitrust law. I'm in favor of monopoly busting. The only caveat that I would put in there is I want to be careful when we're talking about what a monopoly is. I think you and I are using a similar definition, which is someone that monopolizes a situation, which is to say consumers do not have a choice, and therefore they're over the barrel. That's a monopoly to me. The term is being misabused by certain people in the United States, where what they just hate big companies, and they want the companies to be smaller, and they're trying to figure out ways to define the market, to castigate. They're redefining a given market in order to make a company look like a monopoly in it. So
the nastiest company that I know that I could put here is Apple, because they are, at least in EU, we have this law where they will not be able to have their lightning chargers. Everything has to be USB-C, standard one.
Which actually is a regulation I quite like, by the way. That's made my life easier.
And Apple fought tooth and nail against this because they did their own proprietary tech, and they said it's better than everything else, but it isn't. It's just that they kind of they force you into their ecosystem. They used to, at least, where if you buy one Apple product, it is technically compatible with your PC. You can attach a wire to your computer and do this. It's just that it's so difficult. It's tiresome, and it's just not normally available to everyday people to just actually be able to do that normally. That's the whole issue.
I've got a dumb question for you. Like, I know that there's Nokia in, I think, Sweden or Denmark. So there are
Finland. That would be a Finland.
Thank you, Finland. So there are tech companies that are very large that are operating. There's Novo Nordisk out of, again, I think Scandinavia. So there's certainly very large, innovative companies that exist in the European Union. But to my knowledge, there's not like an operating system company like Microsoft or Apple.
EU has fallen behind on tech stuff. We are in a severe lack of tech companies. We've very much fallen behind the United States in that sense.
And is that taxation and regulation? What do you suppose makes the difference for that?
I think that is a problem with regulation a lot, because, for example, Volkswagen is kind of the biggest thing that I think we've got. But yeah, EU has issues. We don't have huge tech companies. We kind of skipped that part. We didn't get the whole boom thing of that. Just that EU dominates the financial markets. That thing is still under our control. We are the people who give out all the loans to everyone else. That's how it's mostly been treated, and as far as I know, that's how it's been seen by most people. Because like we do finance sector, we do the service industry at sometimes cost of what people would call real economy. Again, it's the whole crisis and everything just impacts us. But again, I really don't blame my fellow Latvians and people from the post-Soviet sphere about the situation, because my parents' generation, they had no idea how capitalism works even. This was kind of very foreign to them. And that was one of the big situations where they find this whole mess scammy, because again, we were given, when nationalization ended, and now back to my specialty, just with history, when nationalization ended and we privatized stuff, we were giving out these vouchers, but at the same time, the kind of salaries of the people were so low that those who had made their money through less than legitimate means in the Soviet Union, through smuggling and all this stuff, they knew what was up, and they abused the situation by basically buying off vouchers from the people at about 10% value or something like that, because they didn't know what was happening, they didn't understand it, and they just wanted to eat because the salaries were like ridiculous. I remember that my mom, when I was a kid, made about $20 per month, and that was considered like, okayish. It's just really, it was really, really, really bad in the 90s over here.
Or like in Russia, to go back to that, Russia did not transition to a free market economy. They transitioned to a crony capitalist economy where
that is the thing which people in the West don't understand, and which is where I have to give some credit to Ukrainians again. They at least work hard right now to deal with their own corruption. They do a lot because they've obviously seen all the mess that's been happening. But in Russia, a lot of people say that, Putin broke up the whole, oligarchs and all this stuff. While in fact he did not break up the oligarchs, he monopolized them.
Russia, rather than they needed to privatize massive amounts of their industry. That was a significant part of why the West won the Cold War, was communism is very, very economically inefficient. And if they wanted to have growth, which they needed to privatize things. So that was a good call. The way that they did it was very bad, in that rather than coming up with some situation where you have private companies that either the government owns the stock and the private companies buy it back, or you auction it off or something, they just gave it to people that were friends with Putin and Yeltsin. And they just, the flunkies that were friends with the people in power just...
The way they gave it, by the way, was the similar way that I just described. They were just... these people bought up their share prices. They were allowed to purchase them way cheaper than should be legal. And they also scammed people out of all this mess. Because they were all tied into this cooperative Ozera, or the Lake Cooperative, near St. Petersburg at the time. Putin was involved in this heavily. That's where he comes from. And he was among those people who, at the time, as a cab driver for a bit, he was just taking humanitarian aid given by the United States, stealing it, and then selling it in stores. And also just making money that way, and then using that money to buy off these vouchers from starving people. That was the system, that's how it worked, and that is how they actually made their wealth. And a lot of people blame free market for it, whether they should be blaming Putin and the cronies for doing this, and Yeltsin's government, they were not very efficient at enforcing all these things, and let's not even start to talking about all the bribe money that went around these areas. In Latvia, we had our own oligarchs, and they the worst case in corruption was when the guy sitting in the council of like G20 nations, they gave loans to our countries just to get our businesses started. And this guy was just sitting on the councils, and he was like, unless you give me a kickback, I will not give you the loan. And all these executive committees, so to speak, those were just flunked in. This is why, you get all these people. But in Russia, one thing that about all the businesses, how that happened, there are two aspects to this. Number one is that Russian liberal opposition always have treated everyone else in the country as being inferior, in the sense that one of the guys that I listen to, Michael Nucky, he hates me personally because he doesn't speak English and he misunderstood me. But he has an American citizenship because he was born in the States because of his immigrant parents. He doesn't speak English, yet he flaunts his United States citizenship every third episode. It's still there. And this is why the term liberal has become associated with something dirty and disgusting in Russia. That's number one. And number two, those governors, let me just give you the mechanism of how the money is stolen right now. So you are now a government of some district in some region, I don't know. We usually call it Mukhasransk, or literally the place where fleas go to shit. So that thing. And you notice that there's a successful business there. You want more money, you have been just elected, and that's basically a permission to steal. So what they would do is they use their over-regulation, the same laws as with the front line, where they officially have to remove all the gadgets, but that won't happen with the kickbacks. But they just start sending you regulation after regulation after regulation constantly, like all the checkups that you need to do, all of them, all the time. And then obviously you will fail some because the amount of checking things just is over the top to insane degrees. And then after you fail them, they basically tell you, okay, you can go to prison or you can sell me this company at a very discount rate. Just pushing off business because at one point, Russian economist Dmitry Potapenko, a member of the Russian Libertarian Party, mind you, who runs a retail business in Czech Republic and Russia, he said that at one point his businesses got up to 17 checks per month, various, health checks, employee checks, all this stuff. And then when you're forced to sell your stock, which is now happening in the business, then you turn over to Sberbank, the central bank of Russia, and take a massive, massive loan for everything in there. You turn to State Bank, which is funded by public money. Then you take a massive loan for them, putting all of the business in mortgage, straight up, just mortgaging everything. And then the official in the bank, as he's just loaned you people's money, not a private business money, he's just like, oh, well, we'll just write that the business is bankrupt, sign off the loan so you never have to repay it, and just sell all the equipment, everything to scrap market, whatever. That's how, and then pocket money from that. So in the end, people have paid money, people have lost money twice, they've lost their jobs because this happens in factory towns and everything. It's just that this is a nice scheme how the official in the bank can take people's money by just selling all the equipment and everything to whomever will buy it, and the governor gets to pocket all the money because he just mortgaged everything and took a huge loan funded by the Russian people. This is how the schemes work. And then they kind of launder their money, sadly also in the United States, buying Dutches in California or in London, all these places. That's how the whole squeezing out business works in Russia, which is why all these regions from which Putin now gets their soldiers, which is why they're also depressive and why they don't have jobs, because all the companies that they had to have just been closed down due to this whole situation. They will allow your small business to maybe grow for a bit until they harvest it, but this scheme is the center of the Russian economy. That is how everything is based upon, which is exactly why Putin allows those people to go and take their jobs, basically. Then let's just wrap it up, and I hope that conversation steered off in weird ways, but I hope that at least this has been somewhat informative.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm thrilled that my dog is getting Latvian citizenship. Highlight of my week. Thank you.
But please do wrap it up then, because that would be nice, because otherwise we're getting into super depressive territory.
Yeah. Well, then on a happy note, I'm looking forward to your ascent as not just a private in the Reserve Army of Latvia, but using your military background to springboard into politics. Would love it if you became a member of parliament, which seems like a thing that could happen. You're probably the safest bet of anybody I know becoming a head of government. Seems more likely that you'll become head of Latvia than any of my friends will become president or Speaker of the House in America.
But that's going to happen like 10 years in the future, I think. But if I ever go into politics, I will actually, listen to you for advice. But about this whole economy scheme, I just wanted your last comment on this situation, because now multiply this by all this inflation and everything, and yeah, it doesn't look very nice. Ukraine also has problems, but at least right now Ukraine is dealing with the fact that they're under so much scrutiny because of American aid that they kind of have to go through and clean their act up. Meanwhile, Russia is getting aid from what? Iran, North Korea, and China. So that mess is just not doing very well for them.
I would say anytime you're describing an economic system as a scheme, I probably am not going to like it. I generally speaking, anything that qualifies as a scheme is going to have some problems with it. And it sounds like the Russian economy is riddled with schemes and problems. And so let us hope that the Russian people will have a better, more pacifistic, more transparent, and less corrupt government in the future.
And I would like to add that to the American people as well.
Ditto. I'm rooting for that too.
Because you also do deserve a proper, good government.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm very critical of government. I would love to get to the point where when people die, they're like, I'm not even going to give money to charity. I'm just going to give it to the federal government because it's such a rock star steward of our money. We know that when we give money to the federal government, it will make the world better and it will help our fellow citizens. No one in America thinks that right now. Nobody in the entire country overpays taxes voluntarily, which to me is a very big indictment of the efficiency of government in the United States. I would love to get to that point where, like right now, I give money to charity. I would love to get to the point where I'm like, well, I know the federal government is so on top of this stuff that I'm just going to, instead of giving it to charity, I'll give it to the federal government. It'll do a better job of allocating my resources for me anyway. When we're at that point, I would be much more inclined to give the government more money and power in general. On my end, I am working to try to make the government work better. I do want to slim it down quite a lot, but I want it to be small but functional. I want it to be small but competent. I want there to be good governance. And I am rooting for that outcome. I would love to be in that world.
At the beginning, I will also like to add a special thank you before I say my finishing words to listeners of Political Orphanage, because back in the day, you really saved my buttocks after the whole car explosion thing. Just a couple of days ago, I got someone sent me $20 through PayPal donations who said, a bit late, but hi from the Political Orphanage.
Nice.
And that just felt so nice. So please, in your next episode, give a thank you to your audience, because you've really helped me a lot. And unlike my own government, which makes a lot of mistakes, I cannot say bad stuff about your audience.
Nice, good. Well, my audience is very, very kind. I'm very fortunate in that I have very smart and very generous people that listen to my program and have helped me out a couple of times. And I know that when you got literally car bombed here a couple of years ago, that that was something that we promoted on the show and that people rose to the occasion. And I was very proud of that and very grateful that I'm surrounded by such people.
That is truly awesome. But this whole conversation, weird off in unexpected places, but it's really good because, for one, I'll go back to watching Russian propaganda and analyzing it further on. Not a fun aspect. But yeah, thank you for being on the show.
Hey, my pleasure.
До свидания, товарищи. And happiness is mandatory.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Border Show. If you have any questions or comments, go to our website, theeasternborder.lv, and leave a comment there. Or email us at theeasternborder@gmail.com. We'll be sure to answer. You can also follow us on social media and contact us there. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. It really helps us grow the show. And remember, happiness is mandatory.